Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal. Another Tuesday night, another set of college football playoff rankings, and we saw a lot of shakeup. And I think a lot of the, question marks we had coming into Tuesday night was, all right, what is the committee going to do with Indiana? They got him at number 10, but Dill, where I want to start is with the South Carolina Gamecocks. Now, a lot of y'all are probably sick and tired of me talking about South Carolina coming in at number 15. If you're a South Carolina fan, you're fired up to see Clemson coming in at number 12. And I'll be the first one to admit, I think Clemson is probably not deserving of that number 12 ranking. And it's not necessarily a knock against Clemson. I think it's a very good football team. But what win are you pointing to have Clemson at number 12 in these rankings? Is it a 4-point win on the road against Pitt where they got outgained by over 100 yards? There's just not one of those wins. So I want to start with South Carolina and that Clemson game, which I think might be a college football playoff game. We're going to move to Indiana, talk about a few other teams now. Before we do, and as always, let it fly in the comment section. A lot of different takes that you can have about these rankings, and a lot of these takes have a ton of merit to them. So whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree with the boys, let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. What I want to hear the most is, what are the teams that are underrated? What are the teams that you're looking at and saying they can make a move up these rankings over the next couple of weeks? Let it fly. Appreciate you guys. Dill, let's start with the South Carolina-Clemson matchup. Now, I can hear some people in the comment section saying, well, you have Ole Miss and have Alabama ahead of South Carolina. They have head-to-head wins over South Carolina. My rebuttal to that argument is that we got to recognize that it's a 12-week season and it's college football, and these teams change over time. And I look at the way South Carolina has been playing since that loss against Alabama, and then I look at Ole Miss and Alabama, more specifically Alabama only scoring 3 points against Oklahoma, and say, these are different football teams. Like, tell me South Carolina and Alabama play again and say, could that look like a different game? I think it certainly could. How do you feel about South Carolina coming in at number 15 here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where I'd put them. Like right now, I think when you have the same number of losses, I'd probably lean with that head-to-head, especially because South Carolina, like they're going to get their chance for one of those season-defining wins, if you will. If they beat Clemson, yeah, I think they vault right up into that 12 spot. Where I think it gets interesting, frankly, is do they jump them over Indiana and SMU? Two teams that, again, we talk about not really having relevant wins. Both those teams certainly fall into that category.
So question for you. If Alabama and Ole Miss both win, we would expect Ole Miss to be Mississippi State. Now, Alabama-Auburn, that one could get hairy, but Alabama's the favorite heading in. If Ole Miss and Alabama hold serve, but don't necessarily notch super impressive wins, and then South Carolina goes on the road and beats the number 12 team in the country in Clemson, is that enough? Where all three of those teams have 3 losses. Is that enough for South Carolina to jump both Alabama and Ole Miss in these kind of final college football playoffs?
I think so now. If they go beat Clemson, I think they'll jump both of them. And frankly, look, I know South Carolina does, like, they have the 3 losses, they have the head-to-heads, but like that South Carolina-Alabama game in Tuscaloosa, really tight. Lenora Sellers, he's playing like a different quarterback, which is fundamentally what's kind of changed that matchup, because his mistakes are what cost them that game. Their defense was a huge problem for that Bama team. And Ole Miss just has disgusting losses. That's what it kind of comes down to. Like, they're losing.
Look, what I would say is, like, hey, Alabama and Ole Miss, when they play their best football, they can win a national championship. There's no secret about it. But if you're an Alabama fan or an Ole Miss fan that just watched Ole Miss lose to Florida and Alabama score 3 points against Oklahoma, you also kind of have to admit these teams are roller coasters. They're not very consistent teams, as if you look at South Carolina and say, ever since mid-October when they went on the road and lost to Alabama, it's, to me, been fundamentally a different team. And you said it best, like Lenora Sellers just playing like a different quarterback. That defense is a legitimate top 10 defense in the country. Like, you can look at the numbers. They back it up. They played the 17th hardest schedule in the country, and they're putting out elite defensive numbers. To me, I look at South Carolina and just say it's a different team than what we saw in September.
But I think the real question gets to is, what do they do with those 2 teams sitting above? Because obviously Boise State's kind of in. So let's just say they're not taking up a slot, if you will.
Yeah.
What do you do with SMU and Indiana? SMU, I mean, obviously they're in a play and they're in situation. If they go beat Miami, you got two ACC teams in. But what do you do with that Indiana spot if either Clemson or South Carolina notches a impressive win against each other? Like that to me, I think should be a play-in game. I think either team should frankly go jump the Indiana.
So you're saying like, all right, the winner of South Carolina Clemson, is that enough to jump a team like Indiana?
Have to.
I can see it. There's two ways to look at it. And the problem with Indiana is you don't really know the answer. And we talked about this Sunday afternoon. Was that loss to Ohio State more indicative of Indiana just not belonging as a college football playoff caliber team? Or was that a game where they kind of started off hot? They look like they might just win that football game, but at the very least hang. But then you look at the final box score, you look at the last three quarters and say they 153 total yards of offense. This was an Indiana team was averaging over 40 points per game heading into that matchup.
That's my problem because, again, you probably could look the same thing with Michigan in that second half where they're going long stretches of times when they play the big dogs, if you will. And Michigan's not a big dog because their offense is horrible, but that's a very quality defense. When Indiana's played those two units, they have not looked close to kind of where they need to be with that offensive line, just giving up a lot of pressure and Curtis Rourke not being the playmaker to exactly be able to deal with that.
Yeah, I think
from these top 10 teams.
Indiana's in a tough spot where it's you don't have a performance to point to and say, yeah, that's our college football playoff caliber win. They've looked really good, man. Like when you turn them on against Washington, when you turn them on against Nebraska, they look like a very good football team. But we only had one opportunity to see it, maybe two opportunities against Michigan too, and I don't think they necessarily impressed. Like if Michigan had some sort of pulse on offense, they might win that game on the road. But when they played Ohio State, which was that one college football playoff caliber team, and Reese Davis said on the broadcast, we were up there listening to it, they look good. I don't. That's not what I saw. Like the 153 total yards of offense is not good. It's very bad. And so I'm kind of with you. My argument would be if South Carolina or Clemson, the winner of that game, especially if one team wins emphatically, I think they should get a massive bump up. And mostly South Carolina, like quite frankly, if you ask me where South Carolina should be ranked, I think they should maybe just flip-flop Clemson and South Carolina. I think South Carolina's resume, is South Carolina's resume not significantly better than Clemson's heading into this week?
It probably is, honestly, because South Carolina's losses are, in a sense, respectable. I mean, that LSU one, most people don't agree that was.
And then on the road at Bama, the only ugly loss was to Ole Miss, and you got a juggernaut version of Ole Miss, and obviously that was back when Lenore Sellers was arguably banged up, and I'm not trying to do the injury stuff, but also like still a young quarterback trying to feel himself out. We'll see. Dill, next conversation. Two other teams that arguably, when you're talking about like massive shakeups that we could see, let's look at Texas at number 3. They're going on the road to play Texas A&M in College Station. If they do not win that game, all right, and we have a buddy who listens, and he texted us and said that's wild take to say Texas drops out of the college football playoffs with a loss against Texas A&M. What's your take on that?
I think they're in a really tough spot because you look, then they're going to have 2 losses, and frankly, we're going to have the same arguments against Texas as you'll have against SMU and Indiana, for that matter. Where like, okay, where are the wins you're pointing to, and you're going to have then
the difference between Texas to me and SMU and Indiana is like,
I love Texas.
We know the roster. Like we know that's probably a top 12 team in the country, but if you just blindly, covered up the logo and just showed strength of schedule, marquee wins, losses, if that's college football playoff resume.
Look, and I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, to see them fall to like 9 or like right after Tennessee and just keep them kind of there. It wouldn't surprise me to see it. I'm not sure. I think it'd be totally fair because, again, if you strip the helmets away and you blindfolded, like, okay, is Texas the name brand or does SMU and Indiana have the brand name and like the history and the expectation and all those things that are frankly very nice for Texas right now and working in their favor? No, they don't have that. But like you look, their resumes are going to stack up and be really tight. Now, again, I still do think like teams like Arkansas and Kentucky, like those aren't horrible teams. Those are kind of the quality of teams I feel like that Indiana and SMU are beating. But yeah, I kind of think Texas will be in, but I think there's a very fair argument for those other two,
Yeah.
Indiana and SMU,
And
namely.
I'm not even stacking it. It's like you can compare them to Indiana and SMU, but it's more just like purely look at the resume, cover up the logo, and tell me, do they have a resume with a loss to Texas A&M that tells you they're a college football playoff team? My answer would be not. Now
Now, their
again,
ability to handle Michigan the way they handled Michigan compared to Indiana, that's a nice data point for Texas, I will say.
that's fair. I think that could be fair. Notre Dame, I think, is in a similar boat. And I think there's a lot less leeway for Notre Dame, especially with the loss to NIU at home.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tricky one. They go across the country and go play USC. USC is a team that we've seen play very close games with some very good teams like a Penn State. That's another one of those games that if Notre Dame does not win that football game, they go to 10-2. They're not playing for a conference championship. I think you see Notre Dame probably fall out of the top 12 as well. So if you are a Clemson, if you are a South Carolina that have an opportunity to put together a legitimate college football playoff caliber win, you got to take care of business, right? You control what you can control, but you're kind of rooting for Texas A&M to get it done. You're rooting for USC to get it done against Notre Dame. And if those two things happen, I think there's a strong argument.
No, the one caveat is if Texas A&M wins and then goes beats Georgia, I think you kind of stay in the same place, if you will, right? Like Texas A&M's not getting in if they only beat Texas. I don't think. I think they'll
I don't
probably
think so
need to
either.
win the SEC as well.
Agreed.
But if they go beat Georgia, I think Georgia's in. I think A&M's in.
Yep.
So you probably would need Georgia to also win that football game.
Yeah. And the way Georgia's starting to play, you probably are favoring them with whatever team they play in the SEC
Yeah.
championship. I'll tell you what, and I hate to say this because I've been a Miami Hurricane fan all year. And I think they made a really good point. I think Greg McElroy said it, super smart guy. Super smart guy. He is very smart, much smarter than me. Miami. They are one of the most dangerous teams in the country. There's no argument against it. They got the best offense statistically and really eyeball test. Cam Ward's playing out of his mind. They're a super dangerous team if they play 60 minutes of football. We haven't seen them play a lot of 60 minutes of football, and we've seen some serious struggles, specifically in the back end. They're going on the road all the way up into upstate New York, playing Syracuse, a team that throws the football all around the yard. If you are looking for some more shakeups, and I'm not picking Miami to lose this game, and I know some Miami Hurricane fans going to give me some crap in the comment section, which rightfully so. That's another game that a sneaky one, but college football playoff ramifications. And in that case, I believe Clemson does get in to the ACC championship game. A 10-2 Miami team not playing for an ACC championship.
No,
That's probably another team.
Again, they're
Yeah.
not going to have the wins that they need, and then they're going to have two like kind of abysmal losses. What I'm fascinated with the ACC is I think they fully cracked the door open for two of them.
Yes,
if Miami wins against Syracuse and then loses in the ACC, I think you're in a really tough spot to take them out of it. Now, I don't know that they frankly deserve to be in it if they go lose to SMU in the title game, but you can't really. If we're going to cry foul for the SEC in their title game and not punishing them for those losses,
well, what about SMU? What about if SMU loses to Miami in the ACC championship?
But I frankly, I think SMU might get jumped. So that's probably where I'm thinking like they might get leapfrog. Now, again, they still probably stay above Indiana. They might have an argument. That's going to be a tough one because I wouldn't love seeing SMU in if they don't win the ACC title game. But at the end of the day, them being ranked above Indiana, I don't see who can jump them besides a Clemson or a South Carolina, and they need two teams to jump them if they're going to get knocked.
Fair enough. I ain't gonna lie to you. Got a little confused.
No, I'm just saying they've cracked the door wide open for SMU to not need to win this ACC title game, and I don't really think that's how it should be. I think they're in a position that they.
Well, that's maybe how you feel, but I mean, like you can't lose to Oklahoma if you're Alabama, in my opinion, and then Big 12 chaos. Yeah, well, there's only one Big 12 team. We had like a short conversation about two Big 12 teams getting in. I think it's pretty clear only one of them's getting in. That'll do it, Dill. What I'd be interested to see, and one last take, Texas A&M, if they go on the road or not on the road, at home and beat Texas, how much do they jump? And then is that enough to get them in and losing the SEC championship? I would probably say no. A lot of different scenarios that we'll probably individually break down. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.